Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a fantastic day so far. Today, I want to talk about a balanced scorecard and how that looks like for the UK. So, I want to create an outlook in terms of how the UK is performing using this framework. Now, a balanced scorecard is something that I've used in my consulting experience before in the past. And essentially, it's a way to measure performance of an organization. Okay. So, it's really broken down into four main sort of facets or grids or components. Now, this was developed in, I think, 1990 by Robert Kaplan and another geezer. Okay. And rather than focusing on sort of like the individualistic sort of like elements of performance, it's focusing on these four different things. So it's looking at finances, it's looking at the customer perspective, it's looking at the learning and development and culture, but it's also looking at process and operations as well. So I'm going to go through some of this stuff and really sort of like break it down. Now, obviously, we know that the UK is going through the dunya right now, okay, in many different ways. But how deep in the dunya are they? Okay. For those of you who don't know what dunya is, one time my friend said this word to me many years ago, and I just started laughing. But basically, we're in the you know what, the doo doo. Okay. Now, if we think about it, I think it was at the end of 2024, GDP was 0.2%. So, gross domestic product. Basically, it measures the amount of money that we're making as a country, so to speak. And that went to 0.1% in January, I believe. But if we look at productivity, it's pretty much been zero, close to zero, so to speak. And we have to question why that is. Why is productivity the way it is? Well, if we think about how we inherently make money, the money we make is heavily dependent upon taxes, okay, and financial services. So this country is heavily dependent upon intellectual property, like I said before, legal services, financial services, etc., etc. But if we break down those financial services element, then really that is looking at, dishing out loans, credit, all of that kind of stuff there. So we're ridden in debt. Okay, we got high amounts of debt. I think the UK is planning to spend 1.2 trillion pounds, I believe. Okay, you can check that if that's correct or not. And of course, with the national insurance contributions for employers rising from 13.8% to 15%, that aims to raise 14 billion over the next 4 years of the Labour government. So there's a lot of stuff that's being said there. Now, I think the Organization of Economics and I think it's the OECD, I forget what, yeah, that's it, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So it's an intergovernmental organization that's made up of 38 different countries, have predicted that growth for the year would be 1.4%. Now, I have to validate whether that's for the UK or just generally. But Goldman Sachs expects a 1.2% increase, with KPMG with a more optimistic outlook of 1.7%. Okay, and their reasoning is based on the fact that household spending and government stimulus will take an effect. Now, with all of that in mind, we have to think about inflation. And inflation is really the rate at which prices, goods, and services increase. Okay, and a perfect example of that is, during the COVID pandemic, we had a crisis in terms of transport, which really meant that toilet roll, okay, and other things could not get to supermarkets quick enough. Therefore, in order to manage demand, prices were high, prices went up, okay. So what usually happens when there is high inflation due to inflationary events such as tariff wars or wars or occupations or whatever it may be? What the Bank of England will do, depending on the economic situation, is they will increase interest rates. So you see that thing that says APR, or interest on your loan or credit card or whatever it may be. That, like, they determine the core interest rate, and then the banks or whoever's lending you the money adds an additional on top, just because they can. Okay, and so with that in mind, if inflation goes up, then interest rates are to go up. Why? Well, because if you increase interest rates, then you're gonna get people like you and me potentially who are like, oh, I don't want to pay money for that because it's more expensive. So it changes spending habits, okay? And so if you change spending habits, you get less people buying stuff, which forces businesses and organizations to lower their prices, okay? Thereby bringing inflation down, generally speaking, at least anyway. So this is the idea. So when I talk about inflation here, inflation jumped again to 3%. Now, the Bank of England typically tries to stick to the rule of keeping inflation at 2%. This is a general rule across most countries. And obviously, the government has given the Bank of England the jurisdiction to do this. And so with that in mind, it's jumped to 3%, up from 2.5% in December. So we did well to bring it down, but it's gone up again to 3%. And this may be in relation to the tariff wars that are happening within the US and all this kind of stuff there. And core inflation, okay, core inflation is actually higher at 3.7%. Now, what is core inflation? Core inflation is essentially not taking into consideration volatile, I'm going to call them assets, okay, or goods or consumerist goods, okay. So there are certain things on the CPI index, the Consumer Product Index. I think it's product. You can check the actual acronym for yourself, such as food and energy, which are volatile by nature, okay, especially during these times. And so if you take those things away, you get a core number, and it's currently at 3.7%. So it's pretty high. It's running away from this 2%. Okay. So there is this expectation that, at some point it should slow down. And this has come based on the fact that, I'm doing some deductive reasoning here, that the Bank of England is potentially, and these are predictions made by Goldman Sachs, looking to bring down interest rates from 4.5% to 3.25%. Okay, that's not guaranteed. I just want to check the Bank of England interest rate right now just to make sure it's correct. Yes, it's 4.5%. So the next announcement will be on the 8th of May, and we'll see if there are any declines in the interest rates. So hopefully that makes sense. So we've brought all of that in mind. Okay, we're still on the financial part of the whole balanced scorecard. Another thing to say is that, during the autumn budget, there was this whole idea of fiscal expansion, okay? And basically, the aim was to stimulate domestic demand, but at the cost of fiscal risk. In other words, the Chancellor has put together some rules to ensure that she is able to change the way in which the books are being calculated and balanced. So whatever was done before, it can't be done like for like, if that makes sense. The terms are different, which means she can borrow more money and utilize it for whatever she wants to utilize it for. But again, we're being very tested at the moment, and we got the spring budget that's coming up in the next 2 days or so, which will kind of like see whether she sticks to those rules or make some changes or whatever it may be. So we'll see what happens there. So that's everything in terms of the fiscal outlook. And really and truly, like when we're thinking about finances, that is very much macro. It'd be interesting to see, and I could probably type this out just right now, like what is the average earnings of someone within the UK, and see what happens. This is in Gemini Advanced, by the way, so it should give me something. If it doesn't give me anything, then that's a bit of a bummer. And that didn't really work live, but that's all good. That's not really a big deal. So we'll move on to the next thing. I'll see if I can get something. We've got something here. So Forbes has said that across England and Wales, including bonuses, there is a gross, there is an average earnings amount of £36,972. Apparently this was written 4 days ago, but again, you can check this for yourself. In 2024, it was approximately £37,430, a 6.9% increase from previous years. Of course, it's going to be different in different localities. This is across the UK, so this is what the average looks like. Anyway, let's come back. So we've done finances as part one of the balanced scorecard. Let's go to the second point. Customer perspective. Now, really, I see this as customer experience. And when I think about my work as a program manager, essentially, I think of this change management tool known as CPIC: customer, provider, influencers, and governors. Okay. So, really and truly, the customers of the UK government are the public. So it's kind of like what the public think, like what are their views on certain stuff. And this is an interesting one because this is going to require some level of what's the word, surveying and all of that kind of jazz to get a better idea of what that specifically looks like. So I definitely have some information that I can give to you. So the first thing is, in terms of like the NHS, 87% of people list it as the key or biggest worry that they have. And I'll be interested to know, is this something that you care about? Okay. And I say this to say that, number one, the NHS is obviously related to looking after people. Okay. Well, less about looking after people, but focusing on preventative measures. Okay. Because cures are hard to come by, so to speak. And so it comes down to our natural health. But of course, this doesn't necessarily include social care. We have the Department of Health and Social Care, but there's a lot of focus on the health bit. So be interesting to know what the information is on that. Followed closely by the cost of living crisis, okay, which 86% of people believe is a real concern. So of course, obviously I did that. It was that review on what's his name, Daniel Priestley and Gary Stevenson. A lot of people are backing Gary Stevenson's views because he's focusing on the cost of living element, which is a key point that the UK public are focusing on. So there are some really big key things here. Another thing I want to highlight is something based on the ONS, which is the UK, which is looking at the UK's measures of national wellbeing dashboard. So if we're looking at life satisfaction, I'm just going to go from some really sort of like headline statements here. And this was back in Q3 of 2023. Approximately 1 in 20 UK adults reported low satisfaction with their lives in July to September 2024. In terms of feeling things done in life are worthwhile, approximately 1 in 25 UK adults reported low levels of feeling the things they do in life are worthwhile in July to September 2024. There's also a happiness score. So it says here, the percentage of UK adults reporting low happiness yesterday, so this was quarter 3 of 2023, has remained stable over the last year. So roughly of UK adults, 7.7% rated their happiness the previous day as low when asked in July to September 2024. So I could keep on going, but I'm reading it all weird and I don't want to continue. The point being made is that seems relatively low. So it sounds like, based on the survey results, obviously there are people with low mood and obviously depression and other sort of conditions related to mental health. But generally, it's not as high in terms of the stats that I'm recognizing, because when speaking to people, it feels much higher in terms of stats. People feeling low mood and stuff. So I would question that. I would be more inclined to be a bit more intuitive with this. I think the customer service sort of like, or the customer perspective element of the Balanced Scorecard is more tailored towards, if you're thinking about in terms of emojis, I think people have a sort of like, the emoji that has like the mouth, which is like a straight line and 2 dots. It just looks like very neutral. I think people are in a neutral or distasteful space because they can't get jobs. They're making all this money and getting taxed heavily. They may want to start their own thing, but they're finding it incredibly difficult. They want to spend time with friends and family and enjoy life. They want to travel more, but they don't have the funds to do it. They've got some level, like, there's a lot going on, So I don't know if it's been skewed in some way, shape, or form. But I would rate the customer sort of element a bit lower. I think it's at most a 3. I don't think it's above a 3. Okay. So that's something to take into consideration. I should have rated these, shouldn't I? Maybe the finance element is probably, I would say, a 2.5 out of 5. And the customer satisfaction one is probably a 3, 2.5. Some may even say 2. I know some people out there say there's one, a straight 1. Actually, comment below and let me know how you would rate it. Okay, so I've given it 2.5 for the UK finances. I'm giving it a 3 only because the data that I've read is skewing it. But I think for me, I would give it a 2. But let me not just go down to that route, because that would incite some level of civil unrest, which I wouldn't be surprised it coming in the next 5 years or so. So that's that in terms of customer satisfaction. The next thing is centered around internal processes or operations. So if we're thinking about it, what are the operations of the UK? Heavily, it is dependent upon the state, the public sector. And we already know that there is a clear need or want to change things in terms of the state. It's believed to be too big. It's believed to rely heavily on quangos. And these are essentially organizations or institutions that ultimately indirectly make the decisions for the UK government. And this is why we saw NHS England last week I think it was last week or the week before, get disbanded. Okay, so they got 2 years to basically just be dissolved and become part of the Department of Health and Social Care with 50% cut. So 50% of people are going to go. That includes consultancy spend as well. So, which is quite an interesting one, because you may still have the same house, okay, i.e. the people within it, but then all the consultants go. And, you know, I'm laughing not because, you know, sort of like, shame on the consultants or whatever it may be, because these public servants brought them in. But typically the first people to go are consultants, because everyone knows, like, when it comes to saving costs in any business or organization, it's headcount usually first, because that's the most expensive thing, especially if you look at your balance sheet or whatever it may be. So yeah, whether it's the actual people or consultants, that's a different thing altogether. That'd be interesting, actually. I'd love to see a breakdown of that, thinking about it now. So again, we know that the NHS and social care are in crisis right now. Waiting times are crazy. I think there's an average waiting time of 18 months. There's like 2 million? I don't even know what the waiting list is. I don't know off the top of my head, but I know it's something ridiculous. So everything's just a bit nuts at the moment. So there's a lot of push towards, again, this whole regulatory reform and changing the infrastructure of things in order to ensure that the governance is sensible and practical. So there's better decision making. Now there's a question, okay, as to whether these changes are sort of like political in nature. And that's kind of like, well, no shit, Sherlock, of course they are, because they're politicians. But what I mean by that is, you know, is there an agenda in terms of a neoliberalist agenda, especially because, you know, there are some members within politics who are very passionate about the ideology and philosophy of how things should be, as opposed to just looking at how things should be and making those changes. So everyone's going to have their bias towards it. The Conservatives are going to have it. Some of the Labourists are going to have it. Some of the Liberals are going to have it. Some of the Green Party, they're all going to have it to some degree. But to what end? To what end? You know, there's craziness going on with benefits. There's craziness going on with social care. There's craziness going on with healthcare. There's craziness going on with inequalities. There's craziness that's going on in terms of opportunities for entrepreneurship within this country. So it's trying to understand what are the motives, okay? So it's starting heavily within this operation sphere of the Balanced Scorecard of looking at the regulatory reform. Now, I think it's Peter Carl, who is the Secretary of State for sort of like innovation, science, technology, all that kind of stuff there. There is a huge push on AI. I've spoken about this so many times, like cloud systems development, predictive maintenance, all of these different computing services. And so this may shake up things a little bit. Now, of course, as it stands, I would say the infrastructure is probably a 3. Maybe I shouldn't use 3. Maybe I should say 2.8. Okay. So, but there are things that could improve. But the challenge is, because there is such a loud cry in terms of the customer perspective element, it would insinuate that we don't have the structures to support the issues that are being faced by the public. And so, what does this mean? It means that there's more that can be done. I do think there is potential, though, based on the mere fact that there is an optimism and need and want, not just from the government, but from the people, to improve things. Not for just saying things' sake, but actual improvement. Okay, we're seeing a lot of bigger firms or bigger consultancies being broken up and forming smaller SMEs, so small medium enterprises. There is more of a push towards incentivizing small medium enterprises from in terms of them being having a competitive chance when it comes to winning tenders, which is great. I think there are certain rules in place. I was talking about this with a great bid manager that I spoke to today. So great to speak to you. And also to my friend, Katrina. We talk about this stuff all the time. And there are sort of rules in place in terms of how much a consultancy can make before they have to sort of retender or their sort of proposal needs to be looked at again. In addition to, I think it's how long they can be on a contract for. So there are certain rules in place, which is interesting. But all this to say, these smaller consultancies are heavily investing in AI. What? They're developing agentic tools and all these different stuff that has taken a while for these bigger bad boys to implement. Okay, because they're used to doing a certain thing. Accenture focused on digital transformation. There are other, sort of consultancies focused on sort of like computing or whatever it may be, or whatever it is. Now, of course, the whole consulting industry is heavily dependent upon promises, which is interesting. But of course, you have to be in a position where those promises are met with deliverables. And this is why having the big engine doesn't always necessarily work. But of course, it is very subjective based on experience and actual delivery, isn't it? So it's not much I can really say there. There's also a stat that says that we've seen a 29% growth in green jobs, helping decarbonize the sector. So that's good to see. So when thinking about operations, we're thinking about what does the governance look like, and thereby how are things structurally and process drivenly done in order to produce real results. The UK typically has had a lot of legalese and red tape, which makes things really slow to develop, progress, innovate, all of that kind of stuff there. So we'll only see based on how the other factors change, such as customer satisfaction scores within the UK, i.e. what does the well-being look like and happiness scores look like within the UK. It will also sort of like be demonstrated in our, I guess, productivity to a degree. Productivity doesn't necessarily relate to well-being. It just means that the country is productive, which may be polarized within a specific sector of society or industries. But it does say that something structurally or process-wise is working better. Potentially, at least anyway, because there are many drivers to economics. So that is the internal processes and operations side. So finally, we have learning and growth. I kind of put this as learning, growth, culture, leadership, all of that kind of stuff there. Now, I don't think Keir Starmer has a great sort of sort of rating score. I'm going to type in what is Keir Starmer's rating score, if there is such a thing, his popularity and fame. So, this doesn't look good. So it says here, this is on YouGov, so you can check this out for yourself, yougov.co.uk. His fame, what does fame mean here? So fame is defined by the percentage of people who have heard of this topic. So this topic being Keir Starmer. So 98% of people know who he is. He's our Prime Minister of the UK. Popularity, 27% of people say that... so popularity is defined as the percentage of people who have a positive opinion on Keir Starmer. Only 27% of people are positive about this guy. That's interesting. He's disliked by 52% of people and 18% are neutral. Well, you can't have it all, can you? It's crazy. And apparently the latest data is based on 880 nationally representative interviews of the Great British population collected during quarter four of 2024. So, we don't have a popular leader. Okay, I didn't need to read that to sort of prove that to you. So there is stuff to be said there in terms about our leadership and trust. Okay, there's stuff to be said there, and how can that trust be developed and gained? I guess that's through deliverables, because I think there's this feeling of, I don't know, just distaste. I know politicians get this anyway, but there's something even more, something about this guy. I don't know. Anywho, so we got learning and growth perspective. Okay. Now, of course, we're in a situation we're in right now, and there's something to be said about whether we have set ourselves up to essentially position ourselves for growth. And I don't know if you've heard of this, but essentially there's this whole thing of STEM. Okay, so STEM is a thing that encompasses a broad range of disciplines. I just typed it in because sometimes I forget what it stands for. But it stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So if you look at sort of like typically a lot of Asian countries actually, such as China and India, they've heavily relied on this whole STEM aspect of things. And this is why they're getting rapid productivity, rapid rates of growth, all of this kind of stuff there. And it's believed that if we invest in this stuff, then we're able to solve big global challenges, which positions us as, I guess, players within the UK, within the global stage, sorry. And there was a time that we were definitely within that space. I mean, in terms of an academic standpoint, we still have strong academics that are ranked, top 3 at least in terms of our universities. I think Oxford is number 1 and Cambridge is number 5. I don't know if it's Stanford who's number 2 or another one. I don't know, but I know Oxford is rated number 1. So that's very representative. But then translating that into sort of like potential and realizing that for the UK is the challenge that we're facing at the moment. Okay. So the National Student Survey reveals improvement areas in teaching quality, employability, and digital fluency. We can even, like feel it based on the vibe and culture of people within the UK as well. There's just a different attitude. And I think it's a difficult one because, leadership starts at the top. We have a system that is heavy in regulation. It feels imprisoning at times. And then we have this sterling education, but then the culture is slightly left because UK banter, innit? The UK is the UK. But just because the UK is the UK, it's clearly seen that our lack of investment in things like STEM, and some people may say STEM is dead now, we need to focus on other stuff, has meant that we're behind. FTSE 100 is a perfect example. Now, the prize jewel of any country is not just the number of entrepreneurs that's produced, but it's how happy they are. Think of these Nordic countries. They have high happiness scores. There are many other countries across the globe that may not necessarily have the best sort of like infrastructures, and they're part of emerging markets that still have high happiness scores. So it's a combination between obviously how we tackle inequalities, but also how we produce individuals that can solve big problems globally, so that can be realized and homegrown within the UK. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to develop that. So having an expensive sort of like education within the UK has meant that has been, I guess, leveraged elsewhere. Other people benefit, and so we can't just be making money through the institutions. It needs to translate into something within the UK. So there is something to be said about research and development. I know there is this whole idea of the Silicon Valley within the UK. I've said it before, that whole corridor between Cambridge, Milton Keynes, Bedfordshire, and Oxford. And of course, the whole idea is that, we're mirroring sort of like what's happening within Silicon Valley, where they're close to universities as well. So you've got all of these, smart individuals who are able to funnel this into innovation. Of course, it's not just for those individuals who are smart and everything else. This funnels out into society as well. But also there is something to be said about the education system. Yes, a little bit of money was pumped into the Department of Education, but not enough. Not enough. These teachers are struggling. I've got teacher friends, man, and they work damn hard. I'm telling you, they're so passionate about ensuring that the kids have the right level of education. But it's just not cutting it, man. They need more support. They need more sort of teachers coming into the game. They need the right pay bracket. They need the the right level of sort of like teaching assistants. They need the right resources and tools and all of this stuff that makes the child ready to be as competent as possible. But of course, education doesn't just exist within schools, okay? It also exists in home. And it's almost like, what are we teaching our kids at home? Because that's where it starts. And so this is more about culture for me. What is the culture of the UK? I don't know how to answer that. And I'd love actually for you guys to answer that for me. Unfortunately, there is a very sort of like, at times, it can feel like a dark energy. But there is this wantingness to get out of that dark energy and succumb that sort of like cloud in order for us to feel like we are living and we're united and we're working together, sort of thing. Like even working with people or collaborating with it just feels like, oh, I don't want to do that, or we're scared to take risks, or if you do take risk, or if you do talk boldly, oh, you're a bad person. Like, yeah, what is the culture of the UK? I'd love to know. So there is something that we can do in terms of being more united as UK citizens, British citizens, etc., etc. So I've said a lot of stuff. I didn't rate learning and growth. I would say that's a 2 for me. I think that could be much better. I don't like, so learning and growth and leadership and culture, I would say is a 2 right now. Did I do operations? I think I said that was 3 or 2.8. I don't even remember. But you can let me know what your thoughts are below in terms of how you'd rate it out of 5. So remember, this is finances, customer perspective, internal processes / operations, and learning and growth / leadership and culture. So there, I've done it. I've done my balanced scorecard for the UK. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. Like, how would you rank and rate each one, and give me your reasons why, so that we can get a better understanding of what can be done to sort of like change things. Of course, change is both individual and collective by nature. So if there is anything that you feel that you can do for your own balanced scorecard in life, and I call this my 4 pillars of mastery, then of course you can do those things. And this is why I talk about my life navigation template and all that kind of stuff there. That's how I measure my balanced scorecard. So if you want to check that out, check out the link below. If you want to see more videos centered around portfolio careers, soft economics, things centered around leadership, careers, all of that kind of jazz, then don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. Peace.